I want to tell you a story in two parts. The first half has all of the cinematic energy and drama of the Exodus. Exodus is the second book of the Bible. It tells the story of the Israelites' escape from bondage, their journey through the Red Sea, the desert, and onto the shores of freedom. It's the story Jews tell and retell at Passover every year. The second half has a real Leviticus energy. Leviticus is the book of the Old Testament that conveys all of the codes and rules for living in the society the Israelites would create. It's an endless enumeration of dietary laws, cleansing rituals, and the religious calendar. Safe to say, Leviticus was the most boring part of Hebrew school. But first, let's get to the Exodus. Do you remember where you were in August of 2021? I was 39 years old. It was the second summer of the pandemic, and I was camping with my now husband, Pete. We didn't have great cell signal, but I worked at the State Department early in my career and formed the kinds of friendships that result in incessant texting during any national security crisis. The US was in the process of pulling out of Afghanistan, and I made Pete drive to the top of a hill so I could listen to President Biden on the radio. He spoke about the end to American troop presence while desperate Afghans hung off departing military planes in a terrible echo of the fall of Saigon half a century earlier. That July, as the Taliban marched toward Kabul, they had beheaded a woman named Mahjabeen Hakimi, a member of the women's national volleyball team. They killed her as a warning to other women athletes and circulated the image of her dead body on social media. Zara Sultani, she goes by Zed, was 16 that summer. In July, she had been invited to join the Afghan youth national soccer team on a rare overseas trip to Tajikistan for a tournament. Zed had only started playing soccer 2 years earlier at the encouragement of her dad, and she was a natural, a goal scorer. Afghanistan finished fourth out of 4 teams, but Zed's future on the team looked bright. I grew up in Virginia in the 90s and have vivid memories of the US women's national team with Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy. For at least the last 40 years in America, girls have grown up with soccer and almost any other sport you can imagine. Because women's soccer is so dominant here, many people don't realize that there was a global ban on women playing soccer that stretches back to World War I, when professional women's teams drew huge paying crowds in England. With men returning from war, the English Football Association banned women's professional football throughout the British Empire. Even in countries like Brazil, which will host next year's Women's World Cup, it was illegal for women to play until the 1990s. The news about this World Cup is that FIFA is bringing in more than $10 billion in revenue. FIFA distributes that money among its member federations, including the Afghan Football Federation, to run men's, women's, and youth development programs. Afghanistan did not have a women's team until almost 2010. With startup funding from both FIFA and the UN, the women's arm of the Afghan Football Federation grew into a small league that played across the country. In the decade leading up to the American withdrawal, thousands of women started to play soccer in Afghanistan, at the same time that programs for basketball, bowling, volleyball, and cricket also took off. For young players like Zed, soccer was starting to look like a path to an exciting future. In August of 2021, as the Americans departed and the Taliban targeted women who had played sports, a global network of athletes, human rights lawyers, and refugee advocates started to mobilize to get Afghan women athletes out of the country. The first plane of soccer players left Kabul from Melbourne, Australia on August 24th and included the national team and their families. On September 8th, the Taliban announced that all women's sports were banned. On September 15th, the U-17 team that Zed played on crossed the land border to Pakistan by bus, stayed in hiding for a week, then flew to Portugal. A plane with their families followed in December. Zed's phone was off when the text came through about the bus to Pakistan, so she stayed in hiding in Kabul. In the first few months after the US withdrawal, almost 80,000 Afghans were resettled directly in the United States. But in October, US policy shifted, and Afghan refugees were no longer allowed to enter the country directly. Also in October, FIFA organized a third plane for women athletes. But this time, the passenger manifest would be controlled by the Afghan Football Federation. Most seats were reserved for officials and their families. Only 35 were available for female athletes. None of the women in their late teens or early 20s could bring a parent or responsible adult. Zed was lucky. She was a minor, so her mom and 7-year-old sister were allowed on the plane. They left for Qatar on October 14th. FIFA joined companies, nonprofits, and news organizations also trying to get their people out. But as charter flights left Kabul, it wasn't clear where the refugees would go. Hillary Clinton came to the rescue, negotiating a deal with Albania to house refugees while they awaited resettlement. The 35 soccer players left Qatar after a month for a seaside hotel in the coastal city of Shëngjin, Albania, where they would live for the next 20 months. This is the part of the Exodus story that reminds me of the Israelites wandering in the desert. If the desert was a crowded hotel with nothing to do, the future uncertain, and plenty of drama among young women living independently for the first time in their lives. And then, in the summer of 2023, they were approved. The players cleared rigorous immigration screening and were eligible for green cards in the United States. Those with family members who could sponsor them would go to California or Boston or Chicago. Those with no one would come to Houston. In a righteous world, 10 women athletes who had defied cultural and familial expectations simply to play soccer should have been welcomed with great care here in the Promised Land. They should have gotten nice case managers and host families, scholarships to study English, driving lessons, and counseling to overcome the trauma they had just experienced. Instead, they washed into an overburdened and underfunded refugee system that was about to fall apart. They landed in June and July 2023. At that point, Houston had already received more than 15,000 Afghan refugees, and one of its oldest refugee agencies, the Alliance, closed suddenly in 2024. On his first day in office in 2025, President Trump suspended the refugee admission program, effectively foreclosing any possibility that the players' parents could join them. On February 3rd, Elon Musk announced that USAID would close, eventually contributing to the devastation of the Afghan economy and increasing pressure on the players to get jobs and send money home. Zed went to work at Walmart because she heard they would pay for her GED online. After a year, her English was good enough that she could get a job as a forklift driver at Amazon, which comes with health insurance. But she couldn't play soccer. None of the women who had been marked by the Taliban because they had the boldness to play could find a team or a field or a coach in Houston. In Qatar, they had met Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA, who promised to do everything he could for the women athletes FIFA had personally evacuated from Kabul. 4 years later, most were working at car washes or the overnight shift at Foxconn, with little English or onward education, much less a soccer team. Last May, I had extra tickets to a Houston Dash game. I offered them to my friend Ann Whitlock, who said she knew some Afghan soccer players through her work with refugees who would love to see their first professional women's game in America. So Pete and I took 8 of them to a game. As I walked into the stadium, Ann texted me to be sure to ask the players why they couldn't play soccer. I didn't quite understand what she meant, but in the course of a 3-hour rain delay, I had plenty of time to find out. My sibling, Dean, likes to say that righteousness is our family's favorite emotion. It didn't take much for righteous anger to rise up in me at that Dash game. This story of truly biblical proportions was like a prism refracting every terrible thing in the whole world in 2025. Disastrous foreign interventions, the degradation of women, cruel refugee policies, the corruption of global sport, and a failing social safety net. But thrillingly, the action steps seemed very clear. I had played soccer my whole life. I know a lot of people. I am good at getting those people to do things. In about 2 weeks, we had a coach, a field, donated cleats, and news cameras at what would become the first practice of the Houston Shine. The players who had come out of Kabul on the FIFA plane brought friends to practice, mostly teenage girls who had come with their families as refugees and now were attending high school in Houston. Even if not everyone had played soccer before, we realized that we had enough players to form a team. That night over dinner, the group decided to call themselves the Shine because they wanted to shine like the stars for other women. They would wear blue and white uniforms to be like the sky instead of the red and black jerseys they had worn in Afghanistan that symbolized blood and war. I recruited Rachel Fabra from St. John's to coach. Then Rachel recruited the women of her over 40 soccer team to help out. The Houston Women's Soccer Association let the team join the summer league that was already underway, and pretty soon we were running weekly practices and games. By the fall, we had formed a nonprofit and registered the team for its first official season. National media covered the Shine, and we raised about $25,000 to buy every piece of equipment and kit the players needed, food for games, and scholarships to study English at Houston City College. In November, we held a party to celebrate the end of the first season. With the help of our goalkeeper coach and accountant, Jen, the team surprised us with gifts of traditional Afghan outfits. Pete and I had eloped in 2024 in a tiny ceremony, just the two of us, changing into these beautiful kaleidoscope outfits and dancing into a crowd of players and coaches felt like arriving at our own wedding. That's the Exodus version of the story. A team that once wandered in the desert of an Albanian seaside hotel finds itself again in the promised land of Houston, Texas. But I think there's a reason Leviticus follows Exodus. Remember that Leviticus is the boring book of the Old Testament. It's all archaic rules and lists of do's and don'ts. After the drama of the flight from Egypt, the Israelites had to learn how to live together. It documents the bureaucracy of daily life. When I tell the story of the Houston Shine, it's the Exodus version that most people hear, but I want to tell you the Leviticus version too. In that version of the story, Jamie and Martha, two of the women from the over 40 team, spend weeks negotiating with the player's insurance company so she can keep her car, only to have her get in an accident and buy another car she can't afford. Jamie discovers that two players are sharing a single bed and calls everyone she knows to deliver them a new one. John and Michael, our friends with trucks, show up to move two players out of the apartment where the locks and the air conditioning don't work. Martha teaches them about how to leave an apartment broom clean before you turn in the keys. Our friend Robin hires one of the players in her restaurant, then coaches her through giving 2 weeks' notice at her old job. Rachel and Nancy, the assistant coach, design practices for players who don't speak English. We spend hours and hours helping them create matching passwords with one capital letter, one lowercase letter, and a special character. Two players can't resolve the conflict between them and both quit the team. Rachel and I drink a lot of white wine while reaching the outer limits of any training or preparation to meet the needs of traumatized young women with no safety net. In this version of the story, the cinematic qualities fade away. What's left is what I have come to think of as the sacredly mundane, helping these strangers in a strange land understand how we Houstonians organize ourselves. In this version of the story, the most heroic qualities anyone can bring are tireless patience and an enthusiasm for filling out forms. Something else happened last May, just a few days before our first practice. FIFA announced with great fanfare the creation of the first ever global refugee team for Afghan women, which would be called Afghan Women United. FIFA gave itself the money to run the team from the millions of dollars that would have gone to the Afghan Football Federation if the Taliban wasn't trying to kill female athletes. Zed was a promising prospect for the team and started putting in extra training hours. Then, last summer, as we were playing our first Shine scrimmages, FIFA barred Afghan women living in the United States from even trying out. Gianni Infantino has said that FIFA is putting on 104 Super Bowls for this World Cup, but FIFA told us it would be too dangerous for our players in America in 2025 for FIFA to host a week-long soccer camp for women refugees. I think what they really meant is that it would be too daring, too difficult, too messy to help women who need so much when they had a World Cup to organize. And in a sense, FIFA was right. It is hard. The Shine volunteer crew is nothing short of a miracle of competence. The people I am most grateful for are the ones who know that knowing the rules of the place you live is an incredible, invisible gift. That car the player can't afford? I'm on a committee with a lawyer named Raj, who started writing letters to the bank as soon as I told him about this seemingly unsolvable problem. When we registered the players for English and didn't know how we would cover the $600 tuition for each of them, friends quietly sent $5,000. We didn't even have to ask. That party that felt like a wedding? A few weeks earlier, Layla DM'd us on Instagram to say she and her friends wanted to help. They ended up planning the whole thing. Yalda, who's a 21-year-old pre-med student at U of H, she was a refugee herself, and now she translates at practices and games so the players can understand what Coach Rachel has to say. Maybe it's the athlete in me, but I thrill at the idea that this group of middle-aged rec league soccer players and our friends are doing what the largest sporting organization in the world deemed impossible. That is the Leviticus energy of the Houston Shine, that our actions and our competence righteously deployed do matter in taking on the enormous injustice overwhelming our world in 2026. There is almost nothing I can do to end corruption or war, but I can make 6 trips to Houston City College to finally figure out how to register for English Level 0 and pay for it. I can write down the passwords the players inevitably forget so they can log into their HCC emails. A friend came to watch his first Shine game a few weeks ago. It was the first game of our 3rd official season, almost exactly a year after our first practice. Zed had to cover a shift at Amazon and wasn't at the game. She's working overtime to pay for a surgery her mom needs. We lost, 4-2. But we scored late in the second half, and like all Shine goals, the celebration was epic. Zara Hassani had been driving at the goal all game, missing shot after shot. For weeks, we've been working on connecting good passes, and she received one from a teammate and finally hit the target. She turned around, ran back to the midline, making a heart with her hands, face to the sky. The 4 of us on the sidelines erupted. My friend says we have the highest ratio of joy per goal of any team he's ever seen. This is where I should invite you to find the causes or people in your own life that could use some of your sacred competence. But I love to organize people, so I'm going to invite you to help the Shine. We need money and soccer balls and fans to show up to games. We need people with trucks and a persistence to keep helping, even when the instructions are vague and the way forward is unclear. We need party planners and mentors who won't give up or take no for an answer. If you're extra courageous, we could really use a driving instructor. We don't have a finely tuned volunteer operation. The people who are most helpful are the ones who keep showing up. Come to one game and then another. Follow us on Instagram at Houston Shine FC. Send a donation to cover a player's tuition or a soccer ball off our Amazon wish list. We have 4 games left in the summer season. All of them are at the Quillian Center off West Park Tollway on Sunday morning. You can make it before church. Bring snacks. We'll be the ones in the uniforms that look like the sky.